when my sister Emily called me on that quiet January afternoon in 2025. Snow falling thick and silent outside the kitchen window, each flake catching the pale light like a small, private secret hand told me in a voice that sounded almost bored, "Dad died last night. I inherited everything. You get nothing." I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I did not even feel the sharp sting of betrayal I had once imagined would come. Instead, a small, soft smile curved across my lips, the kind of smile that arrives after years of holding your breath, after decades of carrying a weight you never asked anyone to acknowledge. It was not triumphant. It was not angry. It was simply the smile of release, the expression of someone who has finally understood that some things cannot be taken, because they were never possessions to begin with. I was standing at the old porcelain sink, hands still damp from rinsing Dad's favorite blue mug, the one with the tiny chip on the rim that he always turned so the flaw faced away from him, as if hiding a small imperfection made the morning more bearable. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon and nutmeg from the apple bread I had baked the night before, trying to wrap the house in something warm against the creeping cold. Outside, the big oak tree Dad planted the spring I was born stood bare and black against the gray sky, its branches cradling new snow like fragile glass ornaments. I set the phone down on the scarred wooden table with such care that it made no sound at all, then stood perfectly still, letting the silence of the house wrap around me. The wall clock, my grandmother's, with its slow, steady brass pendulum ticked on. Floorboards creaked faintly as the old foundation settled itself for another winter. From somewhere in the distance, a mourning dove called, that soft, mournful sound that always arrives when the heart needs reminding that time continues, even when everything inside you feels paused. In that suspended moment, my shoulders dropped. The invisible rope I had been pulling for so many years, being the one who stayed, who cooked, who cleaned, who loved, without keeping score finally, I could breathe. And so I smiled, because the chain had broken at last, not with violence, but with the quiet mercy of letting go. My name is Sarah, just Sarah. No middle name that anyone ever bothered to use, no nickname that lasted beyond childhood. I have lived a small life in Willow Creek, a town of barely 4,000 people where the river moves slow and lazy through the valley, where the main street still has a 5-and-dime that sells penny candy in glass jars, where the biggest news of the year is usually who won the county fair pie contest or which family finally fixed the roof on their barn after the last big storm. Our house stood at the very end of Maple Lane, the last place the snowplow reached after a heavy snowfall, where the blacktop gave way to gravel and the cornfields rolled out flat toward the horizon like pages of an open book waiting to be read. The house itself was plain white clob, nothing grand, peeling paint every summer, frost patterns on the windows every winter, but it had a wide front porch with a swing Dad hung when Emily and I were small enough to sit side by side without our knees knocking, and a yard big enough for games of tag, for building snow forts, for lying on our backs in summer counting stars until the mosquitoes drove us inside. At the center of that yard grew the enormous oak tree Dad planted himself, the season I was born. He told me the story many times, how he drove 20 miles to the nursery, selected the sturdiest sapling they had, brought it home in the bed of his old Ford truck, dug the hole with a shovel that had belonged to his own father, and knelt in the dirt patting the soil around the roots, while Mom watched from the porch, hands on her belly, smiling. "This tree is going to grow up with you, Sarah," he said. "When you're tall, it'll be tall. When you need shade, it'll give it," and it did. By the time I was 10, its branches reached the roofline. By 20, they shaded half the house on hot summer afternoons. By 40, they had become a living canopy, sheltering the porch, the yard, and the memories of every season that had passed beneath them. Emily arrived 2 years before me, already full of light and motion from her very first breath. She was the one who ran ahead down the porch steps, across the yard, out to the edge of the cornfield where the world seemed to stretch forever. She talked faster than anyone I knew, dreamed bigger than anyone I knew, wanted more than anyone I knew. I was quieter, slower, content to watch, while she climbed the lowest branches of the oak and shouted that she could see the water tower 3 miles away. I sat on the grass below with a library book, pressing violets between the pages or counting the freckles on my arm. We shared a bedroom until I was 12 too, narrow twin beds with matching blue quilts Mom had sewn from scraps. a small window that looked out over the backyard where fireflies rose like tiny lanterns in summer, a closet stuffed with hand-me-downs that never quite fit either of us perfectly. At night, after Dad turned off the hall light and the house settled into darkness, we would lie there holding hands across the narrow space between our beds, whispering secrets. She told me about the skyscrapers she would live among one day, the dresses she would wear to important parties, the people she would meet who would remember her name. I told her about the stories I read about children who lived in small towns and found magic in ordinary things, about families who stayed together no matter what. She laughed and called me a dreamer. I smiled and called her a rocket. We were different in every way that mattered, and yet we were sisters. And in those dark hours, with only the sound of crickets outside the screen that felt like enough. Our mother died when I was 6, and Emily was 8. Cancer. It came quietly at first, a cough she blamed on spring pollen, a tiredness she said would pass, and then suddenly, mercilessly, one month she was laughing in the kitchen, teaching us how to make pie crust, her hands dusted with flour, her apron tied in a perfect bow. The next month she was gone, and the house felt too big, too empty, too cold even in the middle of July. Dad never talked much about the pain. He just kept going double shifts at the lumber mill, coming home with sawdust caught in his hair and the smell of pine on his clothes, his hands rough and cracked from years of lifting heavy boards. But when he wrapped those hands around us, when he pulled us close on the porch swing and kissed the tops of our heads, they felt like the safest place on earth. Every night he sat between our beds and read to us, mostly stories about Mom, how she loved tulips and planted them every spring in neat rows along the walkway, how she danced barefoot across this very kitchen floor when she thought no one was watching, how she laughed so hard at his terrible jokes that tears came to her eyes and she had to hold her sides. Emily and I would lie there listening, holding hands across the gap between the beds, whispering to each other after he left that Mom could still hear every word, that she was probably laughing right now, up there somewhere, watching over us. We believed it for years. Even now, on quiet evenings when the wind moves through the oak, I sometimes catch myself listening, half expecting to hear her voice in the rustle of leaves. As we grew older, the differences between us sharpened, like the edge of a knife left too long in the drawer. Emily wanted the world, tall buildings, fast cars, important jobs, a life that moved at the speed of her thoughts. She practiced signing her name in different styles on the backs of old envelopes, dreaming aloud of checks with large numbers, of apartments with views of city lights, of nights that never ended. I wanted none of those things. I wanted the smell of old paper at the public library on Main Street, quiet afternoons when the only sound was pages turning, the way sunlight fell through the oak leaves in late spring and made patterns on the grass that looked like lace. When high school ended, Emily won a partial scholarship to a state university 3 hours north. She packed 2 suitcases and climbed onto a Greyhound bus on a humid August morning. Dad and I stood on the porch steps waving until the bus turned the corner and disappeared. Dad wiped his eyes with the back of his sleeve and said in a voice thick with pride and something heavier, "She's going to do great things, Sarah." I nodded because I believed it too. I stayed, took a part-time job at the library shelving returns, helping children find books, recommending stories to older folks who came in looking for something familiar. It didn't pay much, but it was steady, peaceful, and it let me come home every afternoon to cook dinner for Dad, chicken and dumplings when he felt good, vegetable soup when he didn't. Emily called every Sunday at first, telling us about dorm life, professors who actually knew her name, friends from cities I had only seen in movies. She sent postcards, pictures of fountains, skyscrapers, autumn leaves in places that got real fall colors, and Dad pinned everyone to the refrigerator with little round magnets shaped like apples. Then the calls became every other Sunday, then once a month. She was busy, she said, building something real. I told myself I understood. Most days I did. Dad began slowing down around 6. His knees ached from years on concrete floors. His back hurt when he bent to tie his shoes. He retired from the mill with a modest pension and a gold watch he never wore because he said it made him feel like he was still on someone else's clock. I began doing more cooking, both meals, driving him to doctor appointments in the next town over, helping him in and out of the bathtub when the steps became too hard. It never felt like a sacrifice. It felt like love, the ordinary, everyday kind that doesn't ask for applause. Emily got married to Richard, tall and always in pressed shirts, who worked in finance. They had tawny blonde curls, huge smile, and Dad kept every photo she emailed on the mantel above the fireplace. She sent money, sometimes a check folded inside a card. A Visa gift card at Christmas always with the note for Dad. But over time the checks came less often. The calls grew shorter. The visits almost stopped. I didn't mind. I was here. Dad had me. Money slowly got tighter. The roof began leaking above the back bedroom during heavy rains. The furnace started making a grinding noise every time it kicked on. Dr. Copays arrived more frequently. I used my small savings, then most of each paycheck. I stopped buying new clothes, gave up the occasional movie ticket. It was fine. Dad was worth every penny. 5 years before the end, Dad fell in the yard while trying to rake leaves, twisted his ankle badly. I found him sitting under the oak holding his foot, face pale. I called Emily that night. She came home the following weekend, the first visit in almost 2 years. She walked slowly through the house, touching the curling wallpaper, looking at the threadbare carpet, her mouth making a small, tight line. "This place needs so much work," she said quietly. I shrugged and said, "I did what I could." She studied me for a long moment before saying, "Dad deserves better than this." The words settled in my stomach like cold stones. That night, we sat at the kitchen table with Dad between us. Emily talked about Richard's promotion, Tommy starting private school, the new house they bought in a good neighborhood. Dad listened with shining eyes. Then she turned to me. "Sarah, maybe it's time to think about assisted living. Somewhere nice, with round-the-clock help." Dad's spoon froze halfway to his mouth. "I'm staying right here," he said, quiet but firm. Emily gave a tight smile. "Of course, just thinking about the future." She reached into her purse and pulled out glossy brochures, bright rooms with wide windows, smiling staff, manicured gardens. "It's not inexpensive," she said, "but with Dad's savings and the equity in the house." I watched the way her gaze moved across Dad's face, careful, measuring. After she left, that Sunday evening, Dad and I sat on the porch watching the sun drop behind the corn. "She's just worried," he said softly. "That's all." I nodded, but something inside me had changed. A small crack had appeared that would never quite close again. Dad's cough started the following winter, dry at first, then deeper, then constant. The doctor listened to his chest, frowned, said it was the milldust years of breathing fine particles. No cure, only time, oxygen, careful management. I began staying up nights giving breathing treatments, making tea with honey and lemon, rubbing menthol on his chest when the coughing fits came hard. Emily came for a week. That spring brought groceries, spoke to doctors, organized pill boxes. But I noticed she stayed longer in Dad's room when I stepped out for coffee. I heard low voices, fragments. "You have to think about your girls." When Dad came home weaker, thinner, I quit the library job. I couldn't be away 8 hours a day anymore. Emily's calls grew sharper. "You're going to burn yourself out, Sarah. There are professionals for this." I always answered the same way. "He's our dad." One rainy evening she said, "We need to talk about money. Dad's bills are stacking up. Richard and I can help more, but the house is worth something now. We could sell it, get him real care." Cold ran down my arms. "Emily," I said slowly, "Dad is still here. He's sitting in the living room right now." She sighed long, tired. "You're too sentimental. Life has to be practical." That word practical lived in my head for days. Dad overheard us arguing one night and called me into his room afterward. "Don't fight," he whispered. "You two are all I have left." I cried in the hallway afterward, very quietly. The tension grew slowly, like water rising behind an old dam. Emily visited less. When she did, she talked about selling things: the old Ford truck rusting in the garage, Mom's pearl earrings, the house itself. I changed the subject every time. Dad grew quieter. He watched us with heavy, sad eyes, as though he already knew how the story would end. This came. Emily brought Richard and Tommy. Tommy was 8, full of energy, running circles around the oak tree, laughing until Dad's face glowed. We cooked turkey, made Dad's favorite pecan pie, played carols on the old record player. For a few hours it felt almost like the old days, but after dinner, while I washed dishes, Emily followed me into the kitchen. "Dad isn't going to get better," she said low. "We need to sell the house soon, move him somewhere safe." I dried my hands slowly on the dish towel. "No," I said, "this is his home." Her eyes narrowed. "You're being selfish, Sarah. I have a family too, a child, a mortgage, responsibilities." Selfish. The words struck like a slap. I was the one who stayed, who cooked every meal, who sat up through coughing nights, who washed sheets when he couldn't make it to the bathroom in time, but I swallowed the fire. Let's not ruin Christmas, I whispered. She left the next morning before breakfast. Dad stood at the living room window and waved anyway, even after her car disappeared down the lane. She means well, he said. His voice cracked on the last word. I didn't answer. The cough worsened. Another hospital stay longer this time. Emily came again, stayed 10 days, took over conversations with doctors, reviewed every bill, made lists. I felt myself being gently, steadily pushed aside. One night I returned from the pharmacy with Dad's new inhaler and heard her in the hallway on her phone. Yes, the will is set. House to me. Most of the savings to... She doesn't need it, she's alone. No kids. My heart stopped. I stepped into the light. She turned, didn't flinch. What did you do? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. Dad agreed, she said calmly. You don't have children. I do. Life is practical. I stared at the sister who used to braid my hair before school, who promised we'd always protect each other. She was gone. Dad never spoke of the will. He simply held my hand tighter whenever I sat beside his bed. As winter turned to early spring, Dad faded more each day. His breathing grew shallow, his eyes often distant. I read to him every night old books we both loved, stories about faraway places neither of us would ever see. Sometimes he smiled. One gray afternoon he pulled me close. Forgive her, Sarah, he whispered. She's lost her way. I nodded, but the hurt ran so deep I could hardly breathe around it. The end came quietly in the early morning. He simply stopped breathing while I held his hand. Emily wasn't there. She had left the day before, saying she had an important meeting. I called her at 3:17 a.m. He's gone. Her voice sounded very small. I'm coming. The funeral was small, just town people who had known Dad for decades. Flowers from the tulip bed I'd kept up for Mom. Emily cried and hugged Tommy close. I stood near the back, numb. Afterward at the house, she said, the lawyer will read the will next week. I nodded. What else was there to say? 7 days later, afternoon light again, kitchen table again, phone in my hand, Emily's voice flat, businesslike. The lawyer read it this morning. I waited. I inherited everything. House, savings, all of it. A long pause. You get nothing. The words hung there. I should have screamed, cried, fought. Instead, I smiled. Okay, I said softly. She sounded startled. That's it. No argument. No, I said, take it. I ended the call, and the smile stayed, because in that single moment I understood something very clear. The house was only wood and nails. The money was only paper and numbers. What I carried inside me, the nights I held Dad's hand through pain, the stories we told, the quiet mornings we drank coffee on the porch, the love that had no price. No one could ever take that away. Never. The pain arrived later, in slow, heavy waves. I walked through the empty house, touched Dad's recliner, ran my fingers over the spines of his books, stood in the doorway of the room where he died. I cried then, long, quiet sobs into the pillow that still carried the faint scent of his aftershave. I packed slowly a few clothes, all the photos, the family Bible he read every morning. Emily sold the house quickly, didn't come back. I moved into a tiny one-bedroom apartment above the hardware store on Main Street. Small kitchen, one window overlooking the street, enough room for books and a single chair. Friends brought food, said kind things, told me I was strong. I didn't feel strong. I felt hollow, but I kept breathing. Then, one ordinary Tuesday, a letter arrived, old yellow envelope, Dad's careful handwriting. I sat at the little table and opened it with shaking fingers. Dear Sarah, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Emily pushed very hard about the will. I was tired. I let her. I hoped she would learn what really matters before it was too late. But you've always had my heart. From the day you were born, the little piece of land behind the oak tree, the half-acre, I kept back. I deeded it to you years ago, separate from everything else. It's yours. Build something there. A small house, a garden, a life. Forgive her, Sarah, as I've forgiven you both. I love you, Dad. Tears fell onto the paper, smudging the ink. The next day, I walked out to the land, small plot, half an acre, but it had the oak tree, Dad's tree. I sold it eventually, not a large amount, but enough. I bought a little white cottage on the edge of town, white picket fence, small porch, space for flowers. I planted tulips, like Mom used to love. I heard things about Emily through neighbors and old friends, her marriage struggling, Tommy having trouble in school, money not fixing what was broken inside. I wrote her a short letter. Emily, I forgive you. Dad did too. Come see me when you're ready. No reply for months. Then, a simple card arrived. One word on the front in her handwriting. Sorry. We spoke on the phone, eventually short, careful, awkward. Tommy still asks about you, she said. Tell him Aunt Sarah says hi. Forgiveness isn't a single moment. It's a daily choice. Some days easy, some days very hard. I choose it every morning with my coffee. Every time I watered the tulips. Every time I read one of Dad's old books. I went back to the library part-time shelving books, helping children find stories, finding small pieces of joy again. Friends became family. I told Dad's stories, kept him alive in the telling. One Saturday afternoon, a knock at the door. Emily stood on the porch holder, tired eyes, a little thinner. Can we talk? We sat outside. She cried. I was wrong, she said. I wanted control, security. I lost sight of everything that actually mattered. I listened. Then I hugged her. We're sisters, I said simply. It isn't perfect. It never will be completely mended, but it is a beginning. Tommy came later and in the small yard, climbed at the low branches of the young maple I planted last spring. I watched him and thought of Dad. Healing takes time. Some scars remain, but scars can be beautiful too. They remind us we survived. That small smile on the phone the day Emily called was relief from carrying other people's choices, from measuring love in bank accounts, from believing family could only hurt. Now I live simply. I garden, I read, I breathe, and every spring, when the tulips open their bright faces to the sun, I feel Dad close, smiling back. Life is short. Love is long. Hold people gently. Forgive freely. And never forget, the only inheritance that truly lasts is the quiet, faithful moments no one can ever take away. If this story touched something deep inside you, the quiet ache of unspoken love, the slow burn of family betrayal, the unexpected freedom that comes when you finally let go, you're not alone. This is the story of Sarah, a woman who stayed, who chose the small, steady life of care over ambition, who held her father's hand through every coughing night, every hospital room, every fading breath, who watched her sister rewrite the ending of their shared childhood, and still found the strength to smile when she heard the words, I inherited everything, you get nothing. In the end, Sarah didn't walk away empty-handed. She walked away with the only inheritance that can never be stolen, memories that warm like sunlight through oak leaves, a father's final letter tucked inside a Bible, a garden of tulips blooming each spring as proof that love outlives paperwork, and the rare, hard-won peace that arrives when you stop trying to prove your worth to people who've already decided it doesn't count. This is not a story of revenge. It's not a story of winning. It's a story of surviving with soft dignity, of forgiving when every instinct screams to hold a grudge, of discovering that the real family treasure was never the house, never the savings, never the willet, was the quiet mornings on the porch, the stories read in dim lamplight, the hand held until the last breath. If you've ever loved someone fiercely while someone else took the credit, if you've ever stayed behind while the world moved on without you, if you've ever had to learn the painful, beautiful art of letting go and still choosing kindness afterward, then this story is for you. Pause for just a moment today. Think of one person you've loved in silence, without applause, without reward. Maybe it's a parent, a sibling, a friend, a child, yourself. Feel the weight of what you gave. And then feel the lightness of knowing it was never wasted. And if the story stirred something in your recognition, healing, hope, share it. Tell someone, or simply sit with it quietly, the way Sarah sat under her father's oak tree, because stories like this remind us, love is not measured by what comes back to you, it's measured by what you were willing to give, even when no one was watching. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's enough. Thank you for listening to Sarah's story. May you carry a little of her quiet strength with you today. If this moved you, share a line that stayed with you, or tell me in the comments, who is the Sarah in your life, the one who stayed. You are seen. You are enough. And your love still matters even if no one ever writes it into a will.